Welcome to Advocate Today. I'm Aaron Dean. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has again used his executive powers to remove a Democratic state attorney. This time, it's an Orlando area prosecutor. DeSantis suspended Monique Worrell for what he called neglect of duty and incompetence. In response, Worrell called his suspension a, quote, political hit job by a weak dictator. He accused Worrell of pursuing lenient sentences and declining to prosecute certain charges. She plans to run for office again in 2024. Last year, DeSantis removed Tampa elected prosecutor Andrew Warren. A federal judge ruled DeSantis's actions were unconstitutional in suspending Warren. He said that he did not have the power to intervene in the matter. A federal appeals court is striking down a decades-old Louisiana law that prevents illegal drug users from owning firearms. The court deemed the 1968 law unconstitutional, citing a landmark 2022 Supreme Court decision that allows courts to re-examine gun laws. The man who challenged the law will have his July 2022 conviction thrown out. It also means others convicted under the law could challenge their convictions. Connecticut is leading the nation in prison reform. The state went from shipping prisoners out of state to addressing overcrowding years ago to having the 9th lowest incarceration rate in the nation and closing 10 prisons. State Representative Steve Stafstrom says Connecticut's reform efforts have had a big impact on his district. And your state, Connecticut, is doing some positive things when it comes to prison reform. The incarceration and crime rates have been reduced over the last 10 years, but that wasn't always really the case. Can you kind of give us a compare and contrast type thing where it was before, where it is now for our viewers?
Sure. So in the 1990s, Connecticut, like a lot of states, was dealing with some pretty rough gang violence issues. And Connecticut, at that point, had a Republican governor and fairly conservative legislature as well. And really was one of the states that leaned hard into sort of the tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key type mentality. We built a lot of prisons in the late 80s and into the 90s, and really, I think, saw the need at that point to fill those prisons up, which we know obviously had a very detrimental and disproportionate impact on communities of color and our urban centers in the state.
And with Connecticut, being the 9th lowest state, with the incarceration rate in the nation, there has to be something that you all have done specifically to bring in those kinds of results. So, what specifically have you all done to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think really what we've done is it's been a mentality shift over the last 15 years in particular. Started in large measure by then Governor Dan Malloy, who himself was a former prosecutor in New York before joining into political ranks. But we moved intentionally away from that tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key mentality, and realized that being smart on crime is more important. So not just in terms of looking at decriminalizing drug possession and moving away from tough sentences on drugs, but really to looking at a holistic sort of second chance society approach to where we have a tremendous amount of pretrial diversionary programs. So when someone's arrested for a first offense in Connecticut, we really try to do everything we can to keep that person out of the system. So whether it be a DUI or whether it be sort of a low-level theft, getting them into some sort of program on why and what is causing that behavior, as opposed to punishing the behavior. We also have looked at reducing prison sentence lengths. We've done a tremendous amount on juvenile reform, both raising the age and looking at how we treat juveniles when they enter into the system. And we've also looked at how to sort of right size our prison system. So we've gone from a system where at its peak we were incarcerating over 20,000 people to down to nearly half that number now, some 15 years later.
Yeah, well, that's really good. And so, like we said, you are a staunch advocate for reform in this area. And, like you mentioned, you all focus on fairness and transparency within the justice system. Now, when it comes to your specific position, when it politically, can you kind of describe some of the work and goals that you have to help push future reform?
Sure. So one of the big things Connecticut really has led on, we were not the first state to do this, but really with a state recently that went the furthest, was on enacting an automatic clean slate erasure program. And so what we have done is we've looked at sort of best practices and studies that suggest somebody who goes, whether it be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, somewhere in that period of time, without committing another crime after they've committed one, is actually less likely to commit a crime than someone who has never committed a crime before. And so based on that data, what we have said is if you go 5 years after a misdemeanor or 7 years after most felony offenses in Connecticut, those crimes will be erased from your record and automatically erased from your record such that you can swear you were never arrested in the first place. That rollout of that program is happening now, and we expect to erase several 100,000 records in our state come January 1st of 2024.
Prison reform is a hot topic everywhere, no matter what state you're going to. Some states are taking steps like cash bail, reducing sentences and stuff like that. Where can states begin when it comes to this kind of reform? Where should they start?
Well, I think the first place they start certainly is looking at the drug crimes, and particularly possession crimes, and treating those as what they are, an addiction as opposed to intentional criminal behavior, and how we look at that. I think the second thing we look at is pretrial diversionary programs, and whether we are using prison as a last resort to change behavior as opposed to a first resort. And then I think the other thing is to look at the collateral consequences and begin to enact clean slate type legislation like we have in Connecticut, like Pennsylvania has, like Michigan has. And in fact, what I'm encouraged by is that seems to be becoming more of a bipartisan push, because states have realized if you give folks equal opportunity to housing and employment and education because they now have a clean record, that doesn't just help that individual, it doesn't just stop them from recidivating, but it also increases economic productivity as well. And I think that really is some of the low-hanging fruit that most states can do. Beyond that, one of the things we've looked at in Connecticut is sort of the physical architecture of some of our prisons. We had sort of a supermax prison in Connecticut. It was called Northern Correctional. It was where we housed our death row. And the prison was actually built and specifically designed in the 90s so that the walls and the ceiling felt like it was caving in on you, that there was no way out, that it was your end place. And even though it was one of our newer prisons in our system, we closed that recently because we knew that was not a place designed for rehabilitation. It was a place designed to lock them up and throw away the key. And so if you're going to move away from that mentality, not just in your laws, you need to move away from it in your physical infrastructure as well.
And thanks so much for watching Advocate Today. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store to stream us live, and you can even subscribe on our YouTube channel. For the Advocate channel, I'm Aaron Dean, and this was Advocate Today.